They had watched Earth for 20 years before they decided to attack. Their scientists studied humans from their ships hiding behind the moon. They watched television signals. They scanned human bodies. They read human books and listened to human radio. After all this research, they came to a simple conclusion: humans were weak. Admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the blue planet below. He was tall, covered in thick gray scales, and had commanded fleets for 300 years. In all that time, he had never lost a battle. He did not expect to lose this one either. "The humans are primitive creatures," he told his officers. "They live less than 100 years. They need to eat 3 times a day. They need to sleep every night. Their bones break easily. Their skin is soft. They have no claws, no armor, no natural weapons. They fight among themselves constantly. This will be the easiest conquest in our history." His officers agreed. The Dominion had conquered 17 species across the galaxy. Every single one had surrendered after seeing power. The pattern was always the same: show overwhelming force, destroy resistance, take control, extract resources, move to the next world. The invasion began on a Tuesday morning in spring. Warships came down through the clouds above 12 major cities at the same time: New York, London, Beijing, Moscow, Tokyo, Sydney. The great cities of Earth looked up and saw death descending from the sky. Humans fired everything they had. Missiles streaked upward. Nuclear weapons exploded against shields. Fighter jets attacked in waves. None of it mattered. The shields absorbed every attack like water absorbing stones. The alien ships did not even slow down. The bombardment lasted 6 hours. Military bases vanished in balls of fire. Government buildings turned to ash. Power grids went dark across entire continents. By sunset, every major military force on Earth had been destroyed. World leaders gathered in emergency sessions. They argued. They blamed each other. They made desperate plans that everyone knew would fail. After 3 days of death and fire, they did the only thing they could do. They surrendered. Admiral accepted the surrender with satisfaction. Everything had gone exactly as planned. The humans had fought, as all species did at first, but they had broken quickly. Now the real work could begin. Administrators would take control of human governments. Soldiers would keep order. Human workers would mine resources and build goods for the Dominion. In a generation, humans would forget they had ever been free. But Admiral had made a mistake, a terrible mistake. He had studied human bodies, but he had not studied human hearts. He had counted human weapons, but he had not counted human courage. He had measured human, but he had not measured human will. In the mountains of Colorado, a group of soldiers refused to surrender. Sergeant First Class Danny Marsh was 43 years old. He had spent 20 years fighting in wars across Earth. He had served in Afghanistan, where enemies hid in mountains just like these. He had served in Syria, where enemies fought with nothing but rifles and determination. He had buried friends in desert sand and mountain snow. He had seen what humans could do when they refused to give up. When the surrender order came through his radio, Danny turned it off. Around him, hidden in caves and forests throughout the Rocky Mountains, were 300 soldiers. They were men and women from every branch of the military: Army, Marines, Navy, Air Force. Some were young, barely 20 years old. Others were old veterans like Danny, with gray in their hair and scars on their bodies. All of them had made the same choice. They would not surrender. Corporal Lisa Vance crawled up beside Danny and looked down at the valley below. She was 28 years old, a combat engineer who knew how to build things and blow things up. 3 days ago, her entire squad had died when a ship destroyed their base. She had survived only because she had been away getting supplies. "Command says lay down weapons and report to the nearest processing center," she said. Danny did not answer. He watched a transport ship land in the valley. Alien soldiers marched out in neat rows, their scaled bodies covered in dark armor that gleamed in the sunlight. They moved with the confidence of creatures who had never known defeat. "What do we do now?" Lisa asked. Danny thought about this question. The smart thing to do was surrender. The aliens were stronger. They had better weapons. They had ships that could destroy cities. Fighting them was suicide. But Danny had learned something in 20 years of war. He had learned that wars were not won by the strong. Wars were won by those who refused to lose. He had seen farmers with old rifles defeat armies with tanks. He had seen insurgents with homemade bombs drive out invaders with aircraft and satellites. He had seen again and again that the human will to fight was the most powerful weapon ever created. "We fight," Danny said. "We hit them and run. We hide and strike again. We make them pay for every mile of this planet in blood. We show them that humans do not break." Lisa nodded slowly. She looked at the alien soldiers in the valley, so confident, so sure of their victory. They had no idea what was coming. "They think we are weak," she said. "They think wrong." That night Danny gathered his soldiers in a cave deep in the mountains. Flashlights cast shadows on stone walls. Faces looked at him, waiting. Some were scared. Some were angry. All were determined. "The governments have surrendered," Danny said. "But we have not. We are soldiers. We swore an oath to defend our country, our world, our people. That oath did not end because some politicians signed a paper." He paused and looked around at his people. These were warriors, every single one. They had fought in jungles and deserts and cities. They had survived things that should have killed them. They had watched friends die and kept fighting. They knew what it meant to face impossible odds. "They think they have won," Danny continued. "They think we will work in their mines and serve in their factories and forget we were ever free. They are wrong. We will teach them what humans are really made of. We will teach them that some things cannot be conquered. We will teach them fear." A murmur went through the crowd. Heads nodded. Hands gripped weapons. Gunnery Sergeant Carlos stepped forward. He was 51 years old, a Marine who had spent 30 years in service. His face was hard as stone, and his voice was calm and steady. "I have trained soldiers my whole life," Carlos said. "I have trained them to fight in every condition against every enemy. Now I will train us to fight these aliens. They are bigger than us. They are stronger than us. They have better technology, but they have never fought an enemy like us. They have never fought an enemy that does not know how to quit." Outside the cave, the stars shone cold and bright. Among those stars, the fleet orbited Earth, confident in their victory. They had no idea that in the mountains below, a spark was being lit, a spark that would grow into a fire that would burn across the whole planet. The resistance had begun. 6 months after the invasion, something strange was happening on Earth. They were dying. Governor sat in his office in the building that humans once called the White House. He was the ruler of the North American Administrative Zone, appointed by the Dominion Council to manage the human population. It should have been an easy job. Conquered species always accepted their fate after seeing power. They went to work. They followed rules. They forgot their old lives and served the Dominion. Humans were not following this pattern. Read the latest reports and felt a cold sensation in his stomach, a sensation he had never felt before in his 200 years of life. He thought it might be fear. In the Appalachian Mountains, a supply convoy had been attacked. 20 vehicles carrying food and equipment for forces had entered a narrow valley at dawn. They never came out. When search teams arrived, they found burned vehicles and dead soldiers. 14 warriors killed by creatures that were supposed to be weak and primitive. In Texas, a fuel depot had exploded in the night. Investigators found the remains of homemade bombs, built from human materials that should not have been able to damage equipment. But they had. 3 million liters of fuel had burned, and the explosion had killed 30 soldiers. In the forests of the Pacific Northwest, 3 patrol units had simply vanished. Their last radio messages spoke of movement in the trees, of strange sounds, of shadows that seemed to have human shapes. Then silence. The bodies were found a week later, stripped of weapons and armor. "How is this possible?" demanded. "These creatures have nothing. Their armies are destroyed, their governments serve us. Their weapons are primitive. How are they killing our soldiers?" His military advisor, a veteran named, shook his head slowly. "They learn fast, Governor, faster than any species we have conquered. They study our armor and find the weak points. They study our patrols and find the patterns. They attack where we are weak and run before we can respond. Then find them, destroy them. We have tried. We send soldiers into the mountains and they do not come back. We send ships to bomb suspected hiding places and the humans move before we arrive. They do not fight like soldiers. They fight like shadows." In the caves beneath the mountains, Danny Marsh studied a map covered in pins and markings. 6 months of war had changed him. His hair was grayer. His face was thinner. But his eyes burned with a fire that would not go out. The resistance had grown beyond anything he had imagined. What started as 300 soldiers was now 10,000. Veterans from every conflict of the past 50 years had found their way to the mountains. They came alone or in small groups, traveling at night, hiding from patrols. They came with weapons, with skills, with a burning hatred for the invaders. Lisa Vance had become one of the most important people in the resistance. She had captured her first suit of armor 3 months ago, ambushing a patrol with nothing but a hunting rifle and a homemade explosive. Since then, she had taken apart 6 more suits, mapping every wire and circuit, learning every secret. "Their shields are designed to stop energy weapons," Lisa explained to a group of fighters. "The species they conquered before us used lasers and plasma guns. Nobody uses bullets anymore except us. Their armor is not built to stop kinetic impacts." She held up a large rifle, old and heavy, a .50 caliber weapon that humans had used for over a century. This gun was designed to destroy vehicles. Against armor, it works even better. 1 shot to the chest plate will crack it. 2 shots will break through. The fighters listened carefully. They were learning that their primitive weapons were not weaknesses. They were advantages. They had never faced an enemy that fought the way humans fought. Carlos trained the new recruits every day. He taught them to move silently through forests. He taught them to set traps and ambushes. He taught them to kill quickly and disappear before the enemy could respond. "They are stronger than us," Carlos told his students. "1 soldier can lift 3 times what a human can lift. They can run faster. They can see in the dark, but strength is not everything. Speed is not everything. We have something they do not have. We have 10,000 years of practice killing each other." He smiled, a cold and dangerous smile. "Humans have been at war forever. We have fought in every terrain, in every climate, with every weapon. We know things about killing that these aliens cannot imagine. Now we will teach them." The lessons spread across the planet. Resistance cells in Europe learned from cells in Asia. Fighters in Africa shared tactics with fighters in South America. The humans built a network of knowledge, passing information through hidden channels that they could not find. Danny received reports from around the world every day. In the mountains of Switzerland, a cell had destroyed a communication tower. In the jungles of Vietnam, fighters had captured an enemy officer and learned the patrol schedules for the entire region. In the deserts of Australia, a group of soldiers had shot down an aircraft using weapons they had built themselves. They tried to stop the flow of information. They jammed radio signals. They destroyed satellites. They executed anyone they caught sending messages. But the humans found other ways. They used runners who carried messages by hand. They used codes hidden in ordinary conversations. They used methods of secret communication that humans had developed over centuries of war and oppression. Amy was one of these messengers. She was 24 years old, small and quiet, with a face that made her look even younger. She had joined the resistance after watching soldiers kill her family during the invasion. Now she walked through occupied cities, carrying information that could mean life or death for thousands of fighters. The guards barely looked at her. She was just another human, weak and harmless, going about her daily tasks. They did not know that she carried maps of their positions in her memory. They did not know that the bread she delivered to a shop contained messages written in invisible ink. They did not know that this small, quiet girl had already helped plan the deaths of over 200 of their soldiers. As the months passed, they began to realize that something had gone terribly wrong with their conquest. They controlled the cities, but the countryside belonged to the humans. They controlled the roads, but every journey was a risk. They controlled the governments, but the real power was slipping away. Governor sent a message to the Dominion Council requesting more soldiers. The council sent 10,000. Within 3 months, half of them were dead or wounded. The humans were not winning. Not yet. They were too few, too weak, too poorly equipped to drive the away, but they were not losing either. They were surviving. They were fighting. They were making the invaders pay. In his cave headquarters, Danny Marsh received word that the Dominion Council was concerned. For the first time in their history, a conquered species was refusing to stay conquered. "Good," Danny said. "Let them be concerned. Let them send more soldiers for us to kill. Let them waste their resources and their time. We have nothing but time. We can fight for years, decades, generations, as long as it takes." Lisa looked at him with something like wonder. "You really believe we can win?" Danny thought about the question. He thought about all the friends he had buried, all the battles he had fought, all the times he had seen defeat turned into victory by nothing more than stubborn refusal to quit. "I believe humans do not know how to give up," he said, "and that is worth more than all their ships and all their guns." Outside, the sun was setting over the mountains. Somewhere in the distance, an explosion echoed through the valleys. Another patrol had met its end, another small victory in a war that was only beginning. The resistance fought on. 1 year after the invasion, the Dominion Council met to discuss a problem they had never faced before. A species was fighting back, and they were losing soldiers at a rate that shocked everyone in the room. Military analyst stood before the council with a presentation she had worked on for months. She was young for only 150 years old, but she was brilliant. The council had ordered her to study humans and explain why this conquest was going so wrong. "Honored council," she began, "I must tell you things that will be difficult to hear. We made a terrible mistake when we invaded Earth. We understood human bodies, but we did not understand human history." She activated the holographic display. Images appeared in the air, images that the council members had never seen before. Human soldiers throughout the ages, ancient warriors with swords and spears, knights in metal armor on horseback, soldiers in trenches surrounded by mud and death, armies landing on beaches under heavy fire, fighters in jungles, in deserts, in frozen mountains. "Humans have been at war with themselves for over 10,000 years," explained. "They have never known peace. Every generation has fought. Every generation has killed and died. They have developed warfare into something we cannot understand. They study it. They teach it. They pass its lessons from parent to child." A council member raised his hand. "They fought with primitive weapons against each other. Swords, guns, simple explosives. How does this help them against our technology?" "Because the weapons do not matter," said. "The principles are the same. How to hide, how to ambush, how to survive when the enemy is stronger, how to keep fighting when everything seems lost. These things do not change whether you fight with swords or starships." She changed the display to show medical data. Charts and graphs appeared, showing the strange chemistry of the human body. Humans produce chemicals in their blood when they are in danger. Adrenaline, cortisol. These chemicals do something remarkable. They allow humans to ignore pain. They allow humans to ignore fear. They allow humans to keep fighting long after their bodies should have stopped. "How long?" a council member asked. Hesitated. I have recordings. One shows a human soldier who had lost his arm continuing to fire his weapon with his other hand. He fought for 11 minutes before he passed out from blood loss. Another shows a human who had been shot 5 times crawling toward an enemy position with a grenade. She died, but she took 4 of our soldiers with her. The council chamber was silent. They were a proud people. They believed themselves to be the greatest warriors in the galaxy. Now they were learning that they had found something even more dangerous than themselves. There is more, continued. Humans have a concept they call determination. It is difficult to translate. It means they decide to do something and then they do not stop until it is done or they are dead. We thought this was a weakness because it makes them act without logic, but it is not a weakness. It is the most dangerous thing about them. On Earth, Danny Marsh was planning the biggest attack of the war. They had built a detention facility outside Chicago. Inside were 2,000 human prisoners, people who had been caught helping the resistance or simply speaking against the occupation. In 1 week, those prisoners would be loaded onto ships and sent to labor worlds. They would spend the rest of their lives mining rocks on distant planets, and they would never see Earth again. Danny could not let that happen. The facility has a garrison of 500 soldiers, Lisa reported. Heavy walls, shield generators, anti-aircraft weapons. We would need an army to take it. How many fighters can we gather? Danny asked. 100, maybe 120 if we pull people from other operations. Carlos laughed, but there was no humor in it. 100 against 500 inside a fortified position. That is not a battle, that is suicide. I know, Danny said quietly. I know exactly what it is, but we are not going to leave 2,000 of our people to die in alien mines. He looked around at his officers. These were the best fighters humanity had, veterans of a dozen wars, men and women who had already survived a year of fighting against impossible odds. They knew what he was asking them to do. This is not an order, Danny said. I am asking for volunteers. Anyone who walks away, I will not judge. Anyone who stays, I cannot promise you will live. No one walked away. The attack began at 3 in the morning, when the night was darkest and the guards were least alert. 100 human soldiers approached the facility from 6 different directions, moving silently through the shadows like ghosts. Lisa Vance had spent a week hacking into the facility's communication systems. She fed false reports to the garrison, telling them that everything was quiet, that the night was peaceful. By the time the first shots were fired, she had completely cut them off from outside help. Danny led the main assault team through the eastern wall. They used explosives Lisa had designed, charges that created small holes just big enough for a human to crawl through. The defenders were caught by surprise. They had expected human attacks to come from outside, not from within their own walls. The fighting in the corridors was brutal. Soldiers were bigger and stronger, and in close combat, those advantages mattered. But Danny and his people had trained for exactly this kind of battle. They moved in pairs, covering each other, using grenades and explosives to clear rooms before entering. Carlos led a team into the main guard barracks. 40 soldiers were sleeping there, reaching for their weapons as the humans burst through the door. Carlos shot the first 3 before they could stand. His team killed the rest in a firefight that lasted less than 2 minutes. But they fought back hard. Alarms screamed through the facility. Reinforcements poured from every building. The humans were outnumbered 5 to 1, and every minute brought more enemies. Amy was assigned to hold a corridor leading to the prisoner cells. She set up position behind a barricade of furniture and debris, her rifle pointed at the single doorway. She was alone. Her orders were to hold this position until the prisoners were evacuated or until she was dead. The first came through the door at a run, confident that one small human could not stop him. Amy shot him in the throat where the armor was weakest. He fell, and the one behind him stumbled over the body. She shot that one too. More came. Wave after wave. Amy fired until her rifle was empty, then switched to her pistol. When that was empty, she grabbed a rifle from a dead and kept shooting. She held that corridor for 9 minutes, killing 14 enemy soldiers, buying time for 200 prisoners to escape through a hole in the back wall. Carlos found her when the battle was over. She was still alive, but barely. She had been shot twice and her blood covered the floor around her, but she was smiling. "Did they get out?" she whispered. "They got out. You saved them, Amy. You saved them all." She closed her eyes and did not open them again. By dawn, the facility was in human hands. 1,800 prisoners had been freed, running into the darkness before reinforcements could arrive. 63 resistance fighters had died, including Carlos, who had fallen holding the main gate against a final counterattack. 412 soldiers were dead. Danny stood in the ruins of the facility as the sun rose. His body ached. His heart hurt. He had lost friends tonight, people he had fought beside for years, people he loved like family. But they had won. They had walked into an impossible battle and they had won. They had shown that no fortress was safe, no garrison was strong enough, no defense could stop humans who refused to give up. The news spread across the planet within hours. The Battle of Chicago, they called it. 100 humans had attacked 500 and had won. It was the first major victory of the war, and it changed everything. In the mountains and forests and cities of Earth, resistance fighters heard the news and felt hope for the first time since the invasion. If 100 could beat 500, then maybe, just maybe, humanity could win this war. On the Dominion Council heard the news and felt something they had never felt before. Fear, real fear. The fear of a species that was beginning to understand it had made a terrible mistake. The war was far from over, but the tide was beginning to turn. 2 years after the invasion, Admiral stood before the Dominion Council and said words that no commander had ever spoken in their long history. "I recommend we negotiate with the humans." The council chamber erupted in angry voices. Negotiate with a conquered species. It was unthinkable, it was shameful, it was against everything the Dominion stood for. Admiral waited for the noise to die down. He was older now and tired. The invasion that was supposed to bring him glory had brought him nothing but failure and death. 38,000 soldiers had died on Earth. 38,000 against a species they had called weak and primitive. "Honored Council," he said, "I understand your anger, I share it, but we must face facts. This war is destroying us. Every convoy we send requires a battalion of soldiers to protect it, and still we lose vehicles. Every base we build requires fortress walls and constant patrols, and still we find bombs in our food supplies. We control the cities, but we cannot control the space between them. Every road is a death trap. Every forest hides enemies." "Then we escalate," said Councilman. "We use orbital bombardment. We destroy their cities until they submit." "We tried that," Admiral said quietly. 6 months ago, after a particularly bad attack, we bombarded the city of Detroit. We killed 100,000 humans. Do you know what happened next?" The council waited. Recruitment into the resistance tripled within 1 week. Every human we killed had family, had friends, had neighbors who saw what we did and decided to fight. They have a phrase now, a battle cry. They say, "Remember Detroit." Every attack we make gives them more reason to hate us. He activated the holographic display, showing maps of Earth covered in red markers. Each marker represented a resistance cell that had been identified. The map was almost entirely red. "We cannot kill our way to victory. The more we kill, the more they fight. It is as if they draw strength from death itself." In her mountain headquarters, Lisa Vance monitored the communications network. It had taken her 18 months, but she had finally cracked their encryption. Now she could listen to everything they said, from private conversations between officers to the highest-level discussions of the Dominion Council itself. She brought the latest intelligence to Danny Marsh, who was planning the biggest operation of the war. His hair was completely gray now, and he walked with a limp from a wound that had never healed properly. But his mind was as sharp as ever. "They are debating withdrawal," Lisa said. "The Admiral wants to leave, but there is a faction pushing for something worse, complete planetary destruction." Danny absorbed this news calmly. He had expected it. They could not admit defeat, so some of them would rather destroy Earth than withdraw in shame. "How much support does the destruction faction have?" "Enough to be dangerous. If we do not give them a reason to choose withdrawal, they might choose extinction instead." Danny nodded slowly. He had been preparing for this moment for months. The resistance had grown to nearly 50,000 fighters spread across every continent. They had captured weapons, vehicles, even 3 small spacecraft. They had trained ordinary people to fight, to spy, to sabotage. Now it was time to show them what humans could really do. "Contact every cell commander on the planet," Danny said. "Tell them we strike in 3 days, all of us, everywhere, at the same time." The global offensive of 2027 began at midnight on a Monday. Across every continent, resistance fighters attacked positions simultaneously. The scale was unprecedented. The coordination was perfect. The violence was terrible. In North America, Danny led an assault on the main communication hub in Denver. 100 fighters hit the facility from all directions while Lisa worked to jam signals. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, every soldier in the facility was dead, and the Dominion had lost control of communications across the entire continent. In Europe, resistance cells destroyed bridges and roads that convoys depended on. In Asia, fighters captured 2 aircraft and turned their weapons against their former owners. In Africa, a coordinated attack overwhelmed 3 military bases in a single night. In South America, resistance fighters stormed a prison and freed 5,000 human captives. But the boldest attack came in what had once been Washington, D.C. A team of 20 soldiers, the best the resistance had, infiltrated the former White House where Governor ran the North American occupation. They moved through tunnels that they had never discovered, tunnels that humans had built long ago for exactly this kind of situation. They found Governor in his office, reading reports about the attacks happening across his territory. He looked up as the door opened, and for one moment, human and stared at each other. "You cannot win," said. "Even if you kill me, others will take my place. The Dominion is eternal." The team leader, a woman named Blake, raised her weapon. "Maybe, but you will not be here to see it." Governor died at his desk, the first planetary governor in history to be killed by a conquered species. By the time the sun rose, 60% of infrastructure on Earth had been destroyed or damaged. 3 warships had been captured when resistance fighters boarded them during the chaos. Thousands of soldiers were dead. And then came the broadcast. Lisa Vance had prepared this for months. Using captured technology and her knowledge of their communication systems, she sent a signal that appeared on every screen in the Dominion. Every ship, every planet, every station, they all saw the same thing. Danny Marsh stood in the ruins of a base, surrounded by captured enemy flags and weapons. Behind him stood fighters from 6 continents, men and women of every background and color, united by their refusal to submit. "My name is Danny Marsh," he said. "I speak for the free people of Earth. You came to our world thinking we would break. You were wrong. You tried to make us slaves and we became soldiers. You tried to crush our spirit and we found strength we never knew we had." He paused, letting his words sink in across the vast distances of space. "You have a choice now. Leave our world and we will let you go in peace. Stay and we will fight you until the last human draws breath. We are not afraid of death. We are not afraid of pain. We have been fighting and dying since the beginning of our history and we will not stop now. Not ever." The screen showed images of the global offensive. Burning vehicles, captured equipment, dead soldiers, the evidence of what humans could do when they decided to fight. You thought we were weak. You thought our short lives and soft bodies made us easy prey, but you forgot something. You forgot that the flame that burns also burns shortest. We live fast, we fight hard, and we never give up. Leave our world. This is your only warning. The broadcast ended. Across the Dominion, billions of sat in stunned silence. They had conquered species before. They had faced resistance before. But they had never seen anything like this. They had never faced an enemy that attacked so fiercely, so coordinated, so utterly without fear of the consequences. In the Dominion Council chamber, Admiral stood alone before the silent counselors. "Now do you understand?" he asked. "This is not a species that can be conquered. This is a species that will fight until they win or until they are all dead. And there are 8 billion of them. Even if we killed 90%, the survivors would still fight. Their children would fight. They would fight. For 1,000 years they would fight." He took a deep breath. "We have 2 choices. Withdraw with honor, claiming that Earth is not worth the cost, or fight until we destroy them completely, losing millions of our own soldiers in the process. There is no middle ground. There is no peaceful occupation, not with humans." The council voted that night. The decision was close, but in the end, survival won over pride. The Dominion would withdraw from Earth. Humanity had won. The withdrawal took 6 months. Every day, transports lifted off from Earth carrying soldiers who had expected to be conquerors and were leaving as survivors. Human forces watched from hidden positions in the mountains and forests, making sure the aliens kept their promise to leave. Danny Marsh stood on a hillside in Colorado on the day the last ship broke through the clouds and disappeared into the sky. Around him stood 47 soldiers, the survivors of the original 300 who had refused to surrender on that first terrible day. So many had died. Carlos, who had trained thousands of fighters. Amy, who had held a corridor alone against impossible odds. Blake, who had killed Governor but had not survived the escape from the city. Countless others whose names would be carved into memorials for generations to come. Lisa Vance stood beside Danny, her arm still wrapped in bandages from wounds she had received during the global offensive. She had been shot twice while coordinating the attack on Denver, but she had refused to stop working until the battle was won. "It feels strange," she said quietly. "We fought so hard for so long. Now it is over and I do not know what to feel." Danny watched the sky where the ship had vanished. "It is not over, not really. We won this battle, but the war is just beginning." "What do you mean?" "Though we're not the only power in this galaxy, word will spread about what happened here. Some species will respect us, some will fear us, and some will see us as a threat that needs to be destroyed before we become too strong." He turned to look at her with tired eyes. "We need to rebuild. We need to prepare. The next enemy might not be so easy to defeat." Lisa almost laughed. "Easy? We fought for 2 years. Millions died. Cities were destroyed. We came within a breath of extinction. And we won. Against a species that had never lost before, we won. Think about what that means. Think about what we can do now that we know what we are capable of." The rebuilding began immediately. Cities that had been destroyed were reconstructed, but they were built differently now. Underground shelters, hidden weapons caches, communication networks that could not be jammed. Earth was becoming a fortress, and every human being was becoming part of its defense. The resistance networks did not disband. They evolved into a global defense force, sharing information and resources across borders that no longer seemed important. The wars that humans had fought against each other for thousands of years suddenly seemed foolish. They had a new purpose now. They had seen what unity could accomplish. Lisa became one of the leaders of the New Earth Defense Force. She took the technology they had captured and improved it. Within 5 years, human ships were patrolling the solar system. Within 10 years, They were building stations on Mars and the moons of Jupiter. Humanity was reaching for the stars, not as explorers, but as warriors who would never be caught unprepared again. Danny retired from active duty, but he never really stopped fighting. He spent his days training new generations of soldiers, teaching them the lessons he had learned in 2 years of impossible war. He told them stories about Carlos and Amy, and in all the others who had given everything so that humanity could survive. We won because we refused to lose, he told them. Remember that technology can be destroyed, numbers can be overcome, but the will to fight, the determination to never give up, that is something that cannot be taken from you. That is what makes us dangerous. That is what makes us human. 15 years after the withdrawal, a ship returned to Earth, but it did not come with weapons. It came with a single passenger. Ambassador, once military analyst, arrived to negotiate a formal peace treaty. She was the one who had studied humans during the war, who had tried to explain to the Dominion Council why they could not win. Now she had been sent to make peace with the species that had humiliated the greatest empire in the galaxy. She met with Danny Marsh, now 70 years old and serving as Earth's defense minister. He walked with a cane and his hair was completely white, but his eyes still held the same fire she had seen in recordings from the war. They met in a garden built on the grounds of the old White House, where Governor had once ruled and died. The names of the fallen were carved into walls surrounding a pool of clear water. Thousands of names, a memorial to everyone who had fought and died for freedom. I have studied your species for many years, said. I still do not fully understand you. What confuses you? Danny asked. The soldiers, the ones who attacked positions they could not hold, the ones who died for objectives that seemed impossible, the ones who kept fighting when they knew they would not survive. They knew they would die, but they fought anyway. Why? Danny was quiet for a long time. He looked at the memorial walls, reading names he knew as well as his own. Lisa Vance was there. She had died 5 years ago, her body finally giving out from the damage it had suffered during the war. She had fought to the end, just like everyone else. Because someone had to, he finally said. Because if we did not fight, our children would have no world to inherit. Because we believed, deep down, that we could win. Not because we were stronger or smarter or better equipped, but because we were willing to pay any price for freedom. Consider this. Your people frighten us now. The Dominion that once dismissed humanity as insignificant now calls your species the greatest threat in the galaxy. Good, Danny leaned back on his bench. Fear keeps everyone honest, but understand this, we do not want war, we never wanted war. We simply refuse to be slaves. If the Dominion respects our freedom, we will be peaceful neighbors. If anyone threatens us again, they will learn the same lesson you learned. He did not need to say what that lesson was. They both knew. The peace treaty was signed that year. Earth joined the Galactic Council as a full member, the first species to win membership through war rather than submission. Human representatives sat beside species that had built empires spanning 1,000 worlds. Many of those species had dismissed humanity once. None of them made that mistake now. 20 years after the invasion, Danny Marsh died peacefully in his sleep. He was buried in the memorial garden beside his friends and fellow soldiers. The ceremony was attended by millions, broadcast across the planet and beyond. He had become more than a soldier. He had become a symbol of what humanity could accomplish. The veterans of the resistance were honored throughout human space. Their stories became legends, taught in schools, told around dinner tables, passed from generation to generation. The lessons they had learned were written into the foundations of human society. Never underestimate your enemy. Never surrender your freedom. Never forget what you are capable of. And the galaxy learned something about humanity that would echo through centuries of history. A lesson that would be remembered long after the stars themselves grew cold. They thought humans were weak, with their short lives and soft bodies and endless capacity for self-destruction. They thought a species that spent most of its history fighting itself could never stand against a unified enemy. They thought wrong. Because humans were not weak. They had never been weak. They had simply been waiting for a worthy enemy. And when that enemy came, they rose to meet it with everything they had. They fought with weapons and courage and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. They fought with the accumulated knowledge of 10,000 years of war. They fought with the fury of a species that had been underestimated for the last time. They came to Earth expecting easy conquest. They found something very different. They found soldiers who had been hardened by generations of conflict. They found warriors who did not know how to surrender. They found humanity. And humanity struck back. The end.